Welcome to The Debate. So, when we look at the travel recommendations coming out for 2025, there's this really fascinating split, almost a fundamental contradiction. You've got these major, respected publications putting out their best 5 destinations. They're talking up culture, unique opportunities. But then at the same time, you see others issuing these pretty stark warnings about the worst 5. The real puzzle here, I think, isn't just about the places themselves. It's more about the clashing philosophies, really, that are dictating what travel value even means. We're definitely seeing a stark divergence in the criteria that industry experts are using.
And that divergence, that's absolutely key. It helps us understand the hidden mechanics of smart travel planning. The core conflict isn't just a list of places, it's the methodology. Are we going to prioritize the unique, maybe fleeting, time-sensitive cultural opportunity, the Bicentennials, the World Expos, or are we going to be more soberly constrained by these, frankly, non-negotiable structural limits like sustainability, infrastructure capacity, and, crucially, geopolitical risk?
Right. And my position is that the criteria focusing on timeliness, on that cultural opportunity, those are the correct drivers for what constitutes high-value travel in 2025. I mean, the greatest rewards surely come from seizing those moments that are, well, by definition, non-replicable. Look, a logistical headache, that's temporary. A historic cultural moment, that is genuinely a once-in-a-lifetime chance. I see why you think that, focusing on the constraints, but let me offer a different perspective. If you don't go now, you just miss that moment forever.
And that is exactly the kind of flawed calculation that I think the really informed traveler has to reject. I just come at it from a different angle. Prioritizing that irreplaceable moment over the fundamental structural constraints of carrying capacity and safety, it's not just strategically flawed planning, it's actually harmful to the traveler's own experience and, critically, to the destination itself. The promotional narrative so often completely ignores the reality on the ground. And that gap, that discrepancy, that's the hidden pattern everyone keeps missing.
Okay, let's try and ground this in some concrete examples of opportunity then. Let's look at destinations anchored by these fixed, high-yield events. Nashville, Tennessee, for instance. It's a prime example. 2025 marks the Centennial, the 100th anniversary of the iconic Grand Opry. They've got celebratory shows, unique programming scheduled pretty much year-round. Now, this is a reliable, culturally rich domestic destination, low geopolitical risk, offering a pretty profound cultural immersion that, yes, only happens once every 100 years.
Nashville's certainly a clear case, a high-yield event within a very stable environment. I'll grant you that. But let's look beyond that example. Think about Bolivia. It's commemorating its 200 independence bicentennial on August 6th. Now, this isn't just, a big party. It's actually formalized under the Bolivian bicentennial law. That means there's dedicated government-funded infrastructure and organization built specifically around this historic moment.
Exactly. The investment is tangible. You can see it. Or consider Lithuania. It's appealing not just for its culture, but for its focus on progressive sustainability. It holds the prestigious European Green Capital 2025 designation. And that title isn't just symbolic. It translates into measurable high returns for the discerning traveler. We're talking about 61% green space in the capital, Vilnius, and a real commitment to transitioning their district heating to 100% renewable energy quite soon. That's an intentional, strategic investment that genuinely enhances the traveler experience right now.
Those are certainly compelling metrics, yes. But they tend to focus on what the destination wants to be or aspires to be. We really have to look at what is actively, demonstrably collapsing under strain. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the simple existence of a cultural moment somehow overrides systemic failure. Let me tell you why. The worst 5 list, Bali, Venice, Koh Samui, these places represent destinations that have fundamentally failed in managing their carrying capacity. And that failure actively degrades the visitor experience, really to the point where any perceived benefit is just negated.
That's a serious indictment.
It is. But the truly worrying hidden pattern, the one that gives me pause, is the geopolitical paradox we find nestled right within the best 5 list itself. we absolutely have to address Cameroon. I mean, how can a nation be celebrated by, say, Lonely Planet for its 65th anniversary and its, quote, pristine, unspoiled beaches, while at the very same time, it carries level 4 do not travel advisories from the U.S. Department of State and its Northwest, Southwest, and Far North regions? Celebrating a cultural milestone while actively ignoring a level 4 risk advisory, well, that's just poor planning. It's not high-value travel. That kind of disparity renders the best designation negligent, frankly, for vast, significant portions of the country.
Okay, we can certainly agree that safety has to be paramount. But let's maybe transition to an area where the risks are perhaps more economic and logistical rather than security-based. Let's look at Osaka, Japan. The fundamental argument for Osaka in 2025 seems to rest on two pretty undeniable pillars. One, the huge global draw of the World Expo, and two, the macroeconomic advantage of the very favorable weak Japanese yen. The yen's weakness should, in theory, translate to cheaper food, cheaper travel overall, a powerful economic incentive for travelers coming from, say, dollar or euro zones.
But that economic assumption, that's the precise pattern that everyone misses, and it really is the definition of a false advantage. The supposed benefit of the weak yen gets substantially, and I mean substantially, negated by the localized demand distortion caused specifically by the Expo itself, which runs from, April 13th to October 13th. This right here is the kind of insider knowledge that changes everything about the calculation.
Explain that distortion. How does that work?
Well, the moment you localize all that global demand right onto Osaka, prices just skyrocket. We have data showing that mid-range hotel rates, normally around 15,000 yen to 20,000 yen a night, they're projected to jump by 25% to even 50% during those Expo months. That pushes rates up to 25,000 yen, maybe even 30,000 yen per night. So you think you're saving money because of the weak yen overall, but you end up paying these highly inflated local rates because of extreme focused demand. It completely undermines the macroeconomic benefit. That cost saving just vanishes when you actually need a place to sleep.
So you're saying the currency advantage essentially disappears when you focus down on the specific location and the specific time window of the event itself. Exactly. And the logistical strain, that's the next layer of the systemic failure. The organizers themselves anticipate 154,000 daily visitors trying to access the Expo site on Yumishima, which is an artificial island. Critically, access is primarily via a single extended metro line and just two main access roads. That infrastructure, well, it simply cannot handle that volume. It guarantees severe congestion, long delays, and ultimately a vastly diminished value for the visit itself, regardless of how culturally appealing the Expo might be. That's an interesting point, although I might frame it a bit differently. The logistical friction, okay, it's real. But it might be manageable through, advanced planning and technology. The organizers, for instance, set up a traffic facilitation promotion conference, specifically to encourage things like staggered work schedules and telecommuting for locals. And furthermore, travelers themselves can leverage these mobility as a service or MaaS applications, these integrated platforms that combine different transport data, ticketing, route planning.
MaaS is, well, it's a theoretical solution trying to patch a fundamental physical constraint. Sure, technology can maybe mitigate some of the pain, but it doesn't magically expand a single subway line or widen two roads. My concern is that while you're relying on hoped-for behavioral changes like staggered work and these high-tech solutions like MaaS, you're essentially accepting a baseline of severe pain, severe inconvenience as the cost of entry, and that simply detracts massively from the actual experience.
But isn't that the trade-off? If the goal is a truly non-replicable experience, isn't some level of logistical pain perhaps just the unavoidable cost of entry? How do you factor that in?
The trade-off is only acceptable, I'd argue, when the pain is manageable and, crucially, the underlying risk is low. And that brings us right back to the geopolitical paradox, because this is where a high cost transforms into a potentially catastrophic one. We have to press the point on Cameroon again. The Level 4 advisories aren't just abstract warnings. They are there because of documented armed violence, kidnapping, serious crime, and terrorism,
particularly from groups like Boko Haram and ISWA in the far north.
Okay, I fully acknowledge the severity of those regional risks. I do. However, I would argue that this is perhaps a failure of granularity in the advice itself. It's painting with too broad a brush. Travelers can responsibly plan by strictly avoiding those specific Level 4 zones. The capital, Yaoundé, the anniversary celebrations there, they can likely still be experienced safely. Blanket avoidance just overlooks the opportunity to support potentially emerging destinations, and, well, it misses that specific cultural milestone entirely.
But that position, I think, fundamentally misunderstands the risk taxonomy involved here. The danger isn't merely about regional crime rates potentially spilling over. The Level 4 classification explicitly factors in threats that are essentially impossible to mitigate with standard security protocols, specifically things like political targeting, arbitrary detention. These are noted threats in Level 4 analyses for nations like, say, Iran or Russia. And when a security situation hits Level 4, it creates actionable intelligence for any traveler. Choosing to travel against that warning typically invalidates most standard travel insurance policies, and that includes, critically, medical evacuation coverage.
Right, okay, that definitely transforms the financial exposure.
Precisely. It transforms the financial risk from just high cost to potentially catastrophic personal liability. The informed traveler, the one looking for that hidden pattern, must recognize this specific type of risk exposure. It's not just about physical safety anymore. It's about potential financial ruin if anything goes wrong. Until the structural integrity of the security situation demonstrably improves, that opportunity looks more like a potential trap.
I think we agree then that systemic risk, whether it's logistical or geopolitical, is really the core issue. So let's pivot slightly to the volume problem, where we also see this kind of structural failure playing out. We both agree, I think, that over-tourism is actively damaging places like Venice and Bali. But aren't these destinations at least attempting some form of mitigation? You know, Venice has its €5 to €10 access fee for day trippers. Bali brought in its plastic reduction decree aimed squarely at environmental mitigation.
That's a powerful statistic on the effort, sure, but I would frame the outcome very differently. These measures are frankly largely symbolic and structurally inadequate. They create an illusion of management more than effective control. Look at the quantitative failure in Bali. Despite that decree, the island still has something like 52% of its 4,281 tons of daily waste going uncollected. The system is just fundamentally overwhelmed, and the garbage continues to mount.
And Venice's fee? Isn't that generating revenue that can be reinvested into infrastructure?
Well, yes, it's generating maybe 2.4 million euros for infrastructure, but the fee itself is primarily revenue-based, not deterrent-based. At that relatively low price point, it fails to fundamentally reduce the sheer flow of, 30 million annual visitors. The structural failure pattern here is crystal clear. Volume-driven tourism models inevitably erode their own core asset, which is the environment or the cultural experience.
And you're saying media exposure is basically acting as a multiplier on this failure.
It is the ultimate threat multiplier, absolutely. And this is where that insider knowledge really provides a strategic advantage. Take Koh Samui in Thailand. It's already struggling badly with a reported 150,000-ton rubbish mountain and severe water shortages. Now, the upcoming season 3 of the HBO show The White Lotus, which was filmed there, is widely expected to significantly accelerate visitor interest. It's what some are calling the White Lotus effect. This exact phenomenon happened before. Remember, Iceland after Game of Thrones? The almost certain surge in volume will push Samui past its environmental tipping point, mirroring those previous incidents where sudden media popularity led to years of accelerated environmental damage before the destination could even begin to cope.
Right. So the actionable intelligence, the takeaway here is anticipating that media surge and applying a kind of preemptive infrastructure check. If the underlying infrastructure isn't sound, then that media spotlight actually becomes an instrument of destruction, not promotion.
Exactly. We have to look at the long-term economic viability. This kind of volume-based tourism, ultimately it destroys the very environment and experience itself.
Okay, I think we've certainly established that the dilemma for 2025 travel planning is pretty stark. I still maintain, though, that the highest value travel experiences often come from seizing those non-replicable, time-bound cultural opportunities, like the Bicentennial in Bolivia or the Centennial in Nashville. I believe travelers need to prioritize that unique experience, acknowledging that yes, logistics and some risks are often the inevitable cost of entry, but they can be managed through careful, informed planning, maybe utilizing things like those mass applications to navigate the predicted congestion in Osaka, for example. The effort, I think, is justified by the uniqueness of the event itself.
And I would reassert that the structural integrity of a destination measured by its social carrying capacity, its ecological sustainability, and its geopolitical security that must be the non-negotiable prerequisite for any credible recommendation. The true strategic insight here, the pattern to recognize, is that short-term opportunity is completely negated by long-term systemic failure, like we see playing out in Bali's waste crisis, or by potentially catastrophic risk, as demonstrated by the insurance invalidation issue in Level 4 regions of Cameroon. The traveler's real strategic advantage lies in understanding that simplistic, volume-based tourism ultimately destroys its own economic viability, turning those hyped opportunities into highly stressful, often expensive disappointments.
Ultimately, then, these two types of lists, the best opportunities and the worst warnings, they really serve as essential complementary filters.
They do. The truly informed traveler has to overlay that cultural opportunity list with the risk and sustainability list. The real secret, the hidden mechanic, is understanding that the long-term economic viability of travel depends entirely on shifting away from a purely volume-based model towards one that prioritizes structural integrity. And there is certainly much more to explore in the material regarding how these often contradictory forces are shaping our travel decisions as we look towards 2025.